Imagine spending just a few dollars on an ordinary bag of food, storing it properly, and still having something useful decades from now. It sounds almost too simple. Yet one basic staple has become a favorite among people preparing for emergencies: rising food prices and temporary disruptions. Under the right conditions, certain types of white rice can remain usable for decades. That is why some preparedness-minded households store 25, 50, or even more pounds at a time. But there is an important catch. Rice does not automatically last 30 years just because it is sitting in a bag. The type of rice matters. So do moisture, oxygen, temperature, packaging, and storage conditions. So what makes this inexpensive staple so valuable for long-term food storage? And why does the difference between an ordinary bag of rice and a properly stored reserve matter so much? Rice is one of the world's most widely consumed staple foods. It is inexpensive, easy to prepare, compact to store, and versatile enough to become part of hundreds of different meals. For an everyday household, that makes rice convenient. For emergency preparedness, it offers something more: a source of calories that can be stored for a long time when handled correctly. Today, we'll look at why long-term preppers often buy rice in large quantities, what allows properly stored white rice to last for decades, and why simply buying a 50-pound bag and leaving it in the garage is not a reliable storage strategy. Section 1. Why rice? The first advantage is simple. Rice provides a lot of food for relatively little money. A large quantity can fit into a relatively small storage space. And dry rice requires no refrigeration. It also works well with other inexpensive foods. Consider rice and beans. On their own, each is simple. Together, they create a much more satisfying meal. Add vegetables, spices, canned meat, eggs, or sauces, and that same basic grain can become something completely different. That versatility becomes especially valuable when food choices are limited. During an emergency, having one ingredient that works with many other foods gives you more options without requiring a huge variety of separate staples. There is another advantage that is easy to overlook: familiarity. Long-term food storage is not very useful if nobody in the household actually wants to eat it. Rice is already part of everyday diets around the world, which makes it easier to rotate into normal meals instead of allowing it to sit untouched for years. But before buying rice in bulk, there is one distinction that matters more than the size of the bag. Section 2. Not all rice lasts 30 years. When people hear that rice can last for decades, they may assume every variety has roughly the same shelf life. Doesn't. White rice is generally much better suited to very long-term storage than brown rice. The reason comes down to chemistry. Brown rice still contains the bran and germ layers of the grain. Those parts contain natural oils. Over time, those oils can oxidize, causing brown rice to develop an unpleasant smell and rancid flavor. White rice has much of those outer layers removed. With less oil available to go rancid, properly stored white rice can remain stable for a much longer period. That is one of the main reasons long-term storage systems often focus on white rice rather than brown rice. Still, choosing the right type of rice is only the beginning. Even the best-suited rice can deteriorate if its storage environment works against it. Section 3. The real secret is storage. The rice itself is only part of the equation. Long-term storage is really about protecting that rice from 4 major enemies: moisture, oxygen, heat, and pests. Moisture can encourage mold, and spoilage insects can destroy stored grains surprisingly quickly. Heat accelerates deterioration, and oxygen contributes to chemical changes that gradually reduce food quality. That is why serious long-term storage usually involves more than an ordinary open bag. People may use food-grade containers, sealed bags, oxygen absorbers designed for dry foods, and cool, dark storage locations. The goal is to create an environment where insects are less likely to survive and where exposure to moisture and oxygen is minimized. The storage location matters, too. A consistently cool pantry, basement, or other suitable storage area can be far better than a hot garage or shed. And this is where the popular 30-year rice claim needs some context. 30 years should be viewed as a potential long-term storage target under appropriate conditions, not as a guarantee. Actual shelf life depends on the packaging, environment, and storage conditions. In other words, buying the rice is only the first step. Protecting it is what determines whether that investment remains useful. Section 4. Why 50 pounds? So why would anyone buy 50 pounds? The answer isn't necessarily fear. For many people, it is simply mathematics. A large bag can provide a substantial amount of food at a relatively low cost per serving. It can also reduce dependence on frequent grocery trips. Consider a temporary disruption, a severe storm, transportation problem, power outage, or a period of unusually high food prices. Having staple foods already at home means you have options. Instead of relying entirely on the next trip to the grocery store, you already have something available that can become part of a meal. But there is an important distinction between preparedness and simply accumulating. One food, a household living entirely on rice, would quickly run into nutritional limitations. Rice is primarily a source of carbohydrates. It does not provide everything the body needs. A practical food storage plan should include variety, protein sources, fats, fruits, and vegetables, and other nutrient-dense foods. Rice works best as one part of that larger system. The goal isn't to build a pantry around a single food. It is to create enough variety and flexibility that one disruption doesn't leave you completely dependent on your next grocery trip. Section 5. The smart way to store it. Someone decides to store rice for the long term. The basic principle is straightforward. Start with dry, good quality white rice. Protect it from moisture, insects, heat, light, and oxygen. Use appropriate food-safe packaging rather than relying on the original retail bag for decades of storage. Label each package with the type of food and the storage date, and most importantly, inspect stored food periodically. Long-term storage should never mean store it and forget it. A smarter system combines long-term reserves with normal food rotation. Use older supplies when practical, then replace them with newer purchases. That way, the emergency supply remains part of the household instead of becoming a forgotten box in the back of a room. It also gives you a chance to catch problems early, before moisture, pests, damaged packaging, or other issues turn a useful reserve into wasted food. The interesting thing about rice is that there is nothing particularly exotic about it. It is inexpensive. It is familiar. It is easy to prepare. And under the right conditions, white rice can have an exceptionally long storage life. That combination explains why it appears so often in long-term preparedness plans. But the real lesson goes beyond rice. Preparedness does not always require expensive equipment or complicated systems. Sometimes it begins with understanding ordinary foods, storing them correctly, and gradually building a reserve over time. A 50-pound bag of rice may not look impressive, but when properly stored, that simple staple can become a dependable part of a much larger food storage strategy, and perhaps that is what makes it so interesting. Something sitting quietly on an ordinary grocery store shelf can become far more valuable when you understand how to store it and why. If you found this documentary useful, subscribe for more evidence-based survival and preparedness content, and learn how simple everyday supplies can become valuable when you know how to prepare properly.